Ariana Grande talks about why she's not a Christian anymore. Let's take a look.
Was religion a part of your life growing up?
It was, yeah. I went to Catholic schools. I'm Italian. I went to Catholic church. Yeah, I learned. I went to class. I did the Sunday church thing, and I think it was the Pope at the time was like totally homophobic and totally not a fan of women at all, or like also like SpongeBob or Harry Potter, and I was like, nah, this, I can't do this.
Not for me.
I was like, I'm out, guys, I can't do it. And I just became more spiritual because it didn't feel like something that, and a lot of people do, like, it obviously, like, it resonates with them and it helps them through but
Yeah.
I just feel like I'm not a very religious person.
I would love to just try to get into Ariana Grande's head for a second. I believe she has a gay brother. I might be misspeaking. For the Pope to come out and say you shouldn't be homosexual, this feels like an attack on my very identity. It's like him saying that redheads are going to hell or blondes. And then, of course, we'll get into the woman thing later. One of the problems is that Christians are terrified to talk about homosexuality or the prohibition on homosexuality in the Bible because it's such a sticky topic. It's such a minefield. Everyone's feelings will be hurt. You feel like you're saying something arbitrary. You feel like you're saying something that you cannot defend, and instead you simply appeal to authority. You say, well, look, I don't know why God says this, but if he does, then that's what we're supposed to do, right? Francis Chan said, if God said that Chinese people have to walk on their hands, then I'll walk on my hands for the rest of my life. Like, he's God. He can make up the rules. Whatever he wants us to do, we can do. The problem is that every other rule in Christianity is extremely intuitive. Don't lie, don't cheat, don't steal. But then we get to homosexuality. And it's just, I know some people will say, well, it is intuitive. You see two guys make it out, you feel kind of grossed out or whatever. But of course, there's tons of things that gross us out, like, babies pooping in diapers. If our moral presuppositions start with, don't harm anybody, avoid pain for other people, why not just let two guys do whatever they want to do? I think the way to conceptualize it is this. In Hinduism, cows are sacred. In Zoroastrianism, fire is sacred. But one thing that Christians never talk about is that in Christianity, sex is sacred. It's about the purposes of things. Why did God create Eve? He doesn't create a woman, he creates a wife. The first two people on earth are not two people. They're not a brother and a sister. They're a husband and a wife. And this is supposed to show us something, supposed to tell us something. Once you get to 1 Timothy and once you get to Ephesians, Paul starts describing the nature of the relationship between men and women. He describes it as something like a musical that puts on display the very ontology of the universe. Male and female represent Christ and the church. That's Ephesians 5, where these two are not just metaphors, they're not just symbolic, but they are like the display of the nature of the relationship between God and his universe, between Christ and his church. Zoom all the way out, super abstract, between order and chaos. And so the masculine and the feminine actually are created by God. They are, in some sense, platonic ideals. They exist because God has created them to show us something. So the nature of the relationship between men and women cannot be configured in any such way. We all sort of know that if you saw a big, strong 28-year-old guy and a tiny Ariana Grande looking 24-year-old woman carrying a bunch of bags and her husband doesn't offer to help, we would say, what are you doing? And in that sense, we're looking at masculinity and femininity and saying you can't just arbitrarily structure that anyway. There's an order to these things, and some things are more noble and less noble. Well, the fact that there exists such a thing as more noble and less noble, Thomas Aquinas says that this, therefore, implies that there is such a thing as the most noble, right? So you have noble, more noble, and the most noble. In the same way you have true, more true, and the most true, or good, more good, and the best. Whatever that thing is that is the best and the most noble and the most true, this thing is by very nature God. Nobility, goodness, beauty, meaning, these things show us the very nature of God, and God designs marriage as a kind of biological artwork that displays generation after generation after generation. And the love that a husband has for a wife is meant to be sacrificial, undying, pure. It's meant to be the kind of love that says, I will run into a burning building. I will go and fight in a war. I will do anything, laying down my life to protect the one that I love. And the feminine receives that love and joyfully responds. And there is life produced as a result of it. That is a biological display put there by God. So rather than thinking about it like God has established some deontological set of rules that exists outside the universe, and he basically says, stealing is wrong because I said so, killing is wrong because I said so, and being gay is wrong because I said so. Rather, he creates the universe to show his own nature, to show his own glory, and then in doing so, he decides to establish one thing, one sacrament, one institution that will display his very nature greater than anything else could. There's a reason why God's called the Father, or God's called the Son, or God's called the groom, is because these categories exist because God has created them, and he creates them to show us a self-portrait of what he is like.
Would it be fair to say that people who are not a fan of calling themselves religious just don't like any prohibitions?
Yeah, totally fair. Yeah. You're sort of open to the metaphysical, but you don't want it to bind you. You don't want it to paint any kind of ideal, right? The whole point of the metaphysical is that it gives you something to appeal to for purpose and for meaning. But if you're saying, I'm sort of generally vaguely spiritual, are there good spirits and bad spirits? And if there are, then there must be an ultimately good spirit. We will call that the Holy Spirit. Well, that Holy Spirit, it must have some identity. It can't have no identity. And for us, that identity is, it's like a father. It's like a groom. It's like a husband. It's like a son. And so masculinity is in some sense woven into the fabric, the very ontological fabric of the universe. And it feels like what Ariana Grande is saying is, these rules restrict me. I don't know why they're there. She doesn't know why they're there, right? She doesn't know that Christians view gender, sex, and marriage as a kind of divine display of the nature of God. She doesn't know that. She thinks that the Pope just doesn't like gay people. And that's why instead of saying the Pope discouraged homosexuality, she instead said he's homophobic. And so she's placing a kind of motive on him and saying, the reason why he would say, two gay people shouldn't have sex is because he doesn't like them. And then you get to the next part where she says that he didn't like women. And of course, the Catholic Church doesn't allow female priests. And this is another one where fundamental to our Christian faith, we see men as being called to be leaders, not because we think that men are better than women, but because they have a divinely ordained responsibility to do so. That the sacrifice of a husband is meant to put on display the sacrifice of God himself. And so in that sense, the reason why there's church fathers instead of church mothers, the reason why there are patriarchs in the Christian church is because it's not arbitrary that God calls himself God the Father. He could have just chosen God the Mother. If anybody can choose their own pronouns, it's God, right? He could just choose to be she, her, or they, them, or whatever he wants. But he identifies himself as fundamentally masculine. And we don't do that. It was Jesus himself who said, this is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, not our mother in heaven. And that's the reason why Catholics have male priests, or the reason why Protestants have male pastors. Although increasingly we are throwing that away. But you can see the chaos that happens when we have no definition of gender, let alone a purpose for the genders. You can see that absolute sexual madness and pain caused by, someone like Alex Cooper jumping on the Call Her Daddy podcast and telling women to sleep with whoever they want, as much as they want. And, if you want to go sleep with an athlete, go find their hotel. You know, stay at the bar in their hotel and then wait till they come down and then act surprised. And then you go bring them up to the hotel room and then do all kinds of crazy things with them. And she's telling all these stories about all the crazy shenanigans she got up to sexually. And these kinds of things bring you, when you listen to them, sort of a deep nihilism, like a deep sadness. Like, oh, it would be so nice if sex meant something. But it so clearly doesn't now. So to a great degree, sex is only sacred if gender is sacred. Gender is only sacred if marriage is sacred. Marriage is only sacred if it shows the nature of God. And of course, Ariana doesn't believe that. She famously has that song, God is a Woman, right? You believe God is a woman, you know, and God's not a woman. That's the problem, right? So it's almost like the only person that gets to choose their own identity is God himself. And we can't even do him that courtesy because we're insulted by his glory and power. And we say, who do you think you are? I will define you and I'll define myself. Thank you very much.
Do you think that people abuse masculine identity for their own convenience?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, of course, man. Of course it can be abused.
But it isn't integral to the identity.
No, abuse is not integral to the identity at all. Masculinity is supposed to be about self-sacrifice. And femininity is meant to be about the glory of reception, to joyfully receive. And so these two things are complementary. And in the same way you have goodness and evil, both in the physical realm, but also in the spiritual realm, in that same way you have goodness and evil in the feminine and in the masculine. And matter of fact, even though many of the greatest warriors and inventors and people, rulers, kings throughout history have been men, it is also the case that all of the worst people have been men, without exception. And so in some sense, Christianity is saying masculinity is not a value statement, it's a responsibility. And if you fail that responsibility, then you fail to be masculine. To be masculine is to be as Christ is, in contrast to his church.
If you have a friend that has a similar viewpoint to Ariana Grande, what do you recommend saying?
You know how in Judaism, Saturdays are sacred? Well, in Christianity, we think that sex is sacred. And that's the reason why we tell people to wait till marriage. And that's the reason why we say it has to be between one man and one woman. And that's the reason why we have roles for men and roles for women, is because we think this thing shows us the very nature of God. And it just so happens to produce the best societies because it turns out that families need fathers and mothers, and you can't arbitrarily arrange a group of people in just any way. There is something special about having a mom. And there is something special about having a dad, and that's the reason why God is called God the Father. Anyway, that's it for this video. Like, comment, subscribe. Tell me something that you disagree with. Let me know down in the comments down below. Poke holes in my epistemology, and I would love to hear your thoughts. And we'll see you in the next video. Peace. That was a great video. The YouTube algorithm thinks that you would like this video. Let me know if they nailed it.